Las Vegas, November 1954. The Sands Hotel was packed with Hollywood royalty, gamblers, and tourists, all desperate to see the two biggest stars in America perform on the same stage. Frank Sinatra was at the height of his Rat Pack fame. Marilyn Monroe was the most famous woman in the world. Together they were supposed to create magic. Instead, they created a scandal that both of them would remember for the rest of their lives. Because backstage, before 3,000 people could hear what happened, Marilyn Monroe did something that nobody had ever done before. She slapped Frank Sinatra across the face, hard enough that the sound echoed through the dressing room, hard enough that everyone froze, hard enough that Frank's face went red and his hand went to his cheek in shock. What Frank had said to deserve that slap, and what happened in the next hour, would change how both of them saw each other forever. This is the untold story of the night Marilyn Monroe stood up to the most powerful man in show business, and why Frank Sinatra later admitted he had it coming. Frank Sinatra was used to getting what he wanted. By 1954, he had already conquered music, movies, and Las Vegas. Women threw themselves at him. Men wanted to be him. He moved through the world with the absolute confidence of someone who had never been told no, especially not by women. His reputation with women was legendary, and not in a good way. Frank treated women like they were there for his entertainment. A smile here, a crude comment there, and the expectation that any woman would be lucky to have his attention. It was the 1950s. That's how men like Frank operated, and most women just put up with it because that's what you did if you wanted to keep working in Hollywood. But Marilyn Monroe wasn't most women. The show at the Sands Hotel had been planned for weeks. Frank and Marilyn were both performing, though not together. Frank would do his set first, then Marilyn would perform after. It was supposed to be the biggest night in Las Vegas history. Tickets had sold out in minutes. The casino was packed. Every table was full. People were standing in the back just to be in the same room. Marilyn arrived at the Sands around 6 o'clock p.m. The show wasn't scheduled to start until 9 o'clock p.m., but she wanted time to prepare, to do her hair and makeup, to run through her songs, to get into the right headspace. She was always nervous before performances, even though she never showed it on stage. Frank was already there when Marilyn arrived. He was in the main dressing area, surrounded by his crew. The Rat Pack wasn't fully formed yet in 1954. But Frank already traveled with an entourage. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, a dozen other hangers-on who laughed at Frank's jokes and did whatever he wanted. When Marilyn walked into the backstage area, Frank noticed immediately. Of course he did. Every man in the room noticed when Marilyn Monroe walked in anyway. "Well, well," Frank said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "If it isn't the blonde bombshell. Hey, Marilyn, you gonna shake those hips for us tonight?" Marilyn smiled politely but didn't respond. She had learned early in her career how to handle men like Frank. You smiled. You stayed professional. You didn't engage. And you definitely didn't tell them what you really thought. She walked past Frank's group toward her own dressing room, but Frank wasn't done. "Hey, where you going so fast?" Frank called after her. "Don't you want to have a drink with us? Get to know the fellas?" "I need to get ready for the show," Marilyn said over her shoulder. Maybe after. Frank mimicked in a high-pitched voice, making his crew laugh. "Come on, sweetheart. One drink. I promise we don't bite." He paused. "Unless you want us to." More laughter from the guys. Marilyn felt her jaw tighten, but she kept walking. She had heard worse. She had dealt with worse. One inappropriate comment from Frank Sinatra wasn't going to ruin her night, but that was just the beginning. Over the next hour, as Marilyn tried to prepare for her performance, Frank kept finding excuses to be near her dressing room. He'd walk by and make comments. He'd knock on her door with some excuse about coordinating the show, but really just wanting to flirt. He'd send one of his guys to tell her that Frank wanted to see her. Marilyn ignored it all. She focused on her makeup, her hair, her dress, her songs. She had a job to do. She was a professional. She could handle Frank Sinatra being Frank Sinatra for one night, but then Frank crossed a line. It was about 8:30 p.m., 30 minutes before showtime. Marilyn was doing her final preparations when there was a knock on her dressing room door. She assumed it was the stage manager giving her the time warning. "Come in," Marilyn called. The door opened. It wasn't the stage manager. It was Frank. He walked into her dressing room without being invited, closed the door behind him, leaned against it with that famous Sinatra smile. "Hey, doll," Frank said. "You look beautiful. That dress is something else." Marilyn was wearing a gold sequined gown, tight, glamorous, Exactly the kind of dress that made her Marilyn Monroe, but the way Frank was looking at her made her uncomfortable. "Thank you," Marilyn said, keeping her voice neutral. "I need to finish getting ready." Sure, Frank said, not moving. "I just wanted to come by, see how you're doing. Make sure you're not too nervous." He walked closer. "You know, if you need someone to help you relax before the show, I'm very good at helping ladies relax." There it was. The proposition, barely disguised, completely inappropriate. "I'm fine, Frank," Marilyn said firmly. "You should probably get ready for your own set." "My set?" Frank laughed. "Honey, I could go out there and sing the phone book and they'd love it. I don't need to prepare." He moved even closer, close enough that Marilyn could smell the whiskey on his breath. "But you know what would make tonight perfect? After the show, you and me, we go up to my suite, have some drinks, get to know each other better." His voice dropped lower. "I could show you how a real man treats a lady." Marilyn felt anger rising in her chest. This wasn't playful flirting. This wasn't just Frank being Frank. This was Frank assuming that because he was Frank Sinatra, Marilyn would just say yes, that she'd be grateful for his attention, that she'd jump at the chance to go to his suite. "I don't think so," Marilyn said, her voice cold now. "Now please leave. I need to finish getting ready." Frank's smile faded. He wasn't used to being rejected, especially not by women. "Come on, don't be like that," Frank said. "I'm giving you a compliment. Most girls would kill for an invitation like that." "I'm not most girls," Marilyn said. "Yeah, I can see that," Frank said. And now there was an edge to his voice. "You're one of those girls who thinks she's too good, who thinks because men like to look at you, that makes you special. But let me tell you something, sweetheart. You're not special. You're just another pretty face. It's another blonde with a nice body. And in a few years, when you're not so young anymore, nobody's going to remember your name but me. I'm Frank Sinatra. I'm going to be a legend forever." That's when Marilyn understood. This wasn't really about attraction. This was about power. Frank was trying to put her in her place, trying to make her feel small, trying to remind her that no matter how famous she was, men like him were more important. "Get out," Marilyn said. "Or what?" Frank challenged. "You gonna call security? Tell them Big Bad Frank was mean to you? That'll be good for your image." Real professional. Marilyn stood up from her makeup chair. Even in heels, she was still shorter than Frank, but she didn't feel small anymore. She felt angry. Angry at Frank, angry at every man who had ever treated her like an object, angry at a world that let men like Frank Sinatra talk to women like they were property. "Let me explain something to you, Frank," Marilyn said, her voice steady and cold. "You think because you're famous, because you have money and power and a bunch of yes men following you around, that you can talk to women however you want? That you can walk into my dressing room and proposition me like I'm some showgirl you hired for the weekend?" "Hey, I'm not finished," Marilyn interrupted, and the force in her voice made Frank stop talking. "You think I'm just another pretty face, just another blonde, but I'm Marilyn Monroe. I've worked harder than you'll ever know to get where I am. I've been underestimated and dismissed and treated like I'm nothing my entire life, and I'm done with it. I'm especially done with men like you who think my only value is whether or not you find me attractive." Frank's face was getting red now. "You need to watch how you talk to me." "No," Marilyn said. "You need to watch how you talk to me." I said no. No to drinks, no to your suite, no to all of it. And you need to respect that and get out of my dressing room right now. For a moment, Frank just stared at her. He was used to being the one in control, used to being the one who ended conversations, being told to leave, being rejected, being stood up to. These were not things that happened to Frank Sinatra. "You know what your problem is," Frank said, his voice mean now. "You take yourself too seriously. You think you're some kind of artist, but really you're just a girl who got lucky. A girl who looks good in a tight dress. That's all you are. That's all you'll ever be." And that's when Marilyn's hand moved before her brain could stop it. The slap was hard and fast. Her palm connected with Frank's cheek with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the small dressing room. Frank stumbled back a step, his hand flying to his face, his eyes wide with shock. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just stared at each other. Then the dressing room door opened. Dean Martin stuck his head in, smiling. "Hey, Frank, we're on in." He stopped, saw Frank holding his cheeks, saw Marilyn's raised hand, saw the fury in both of their faces. What's going on here?" "Nothing," Frank said through gritted teeth. "We're done here." He pushed past Dean and walked out of the dressing room. Dean looked at Marilyn, questions all over his face. "He deserved it," Marilyn said simply. Then she sat back down at her makeup mirror and calmly finished her lipstick like nothing had happened. But outside the dressing room, everything had happened. Frank was pacing back and forth, his face red, his hand still on his cheek. The guys had gathered around him. "What the hell happened in there?" Sammy Davis Jr. asked. "That crazy broad hit me," Frank said. "Actually hit me." "Why?" Dean asked. Frank hesitated, because the honest answer was that he had been inappropriate, and Marilyn had defended herself. But Frank Sinatra wasn't about to admit that in front of his crew. "I don't know," Frank muttered. "Women are crazy." But Dean Martin had known Frank for years, and he had seen that look on Frank's face before. The look that said Frank had pushed too far and someone had pushed back. "What did you say to her, Frank?" Dean asked. "Nothing," Frank said. "Just being friendly." Frank sighed. "I invited her for drinks after the show. She got all uptight about it, started lecturing me about respect or some feminist garbage, so I told her she takes herself too seriously. And then she hit me." Sammy whistled low. "Man, you must have really pissed her off." "She hit me," Frank repeated, like he still couldn't believe it. "Nobody hits Frank Sinatra." "Well," Peter Lawford said carefully, "Marilyn Monroe just did." The show that night was awkward. Frank went on first and performed like nothing had happened. He was a professional after all. He sang. He charmed the audience. He made them laugh. But everyone backstage could see that something was off. Frank's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. His jokes felt forced. He kept touching his cheek. When Marilyn took the stage after Frank's set, the audience went wild. She sang. She sparkled. She was everything they wanted her to be. And she didn't mention Frank once. After the show, Frank disappeared to his suite. His crew tried to get him to come out, to hit the casino, to do what they always did in Vegas. But Frank wasn't in the mood. The next day, Frank's face hurt. Not from the slap, though that hadn't helped, but from the hangover. He'd spent the night alone in his suite, drinking, thinking about what had happened. He thought about what he'd said to Marilyn, about calling her just another blonde, about telling her she wasn't special, about propositioning her and then getting angry when she said no. And slowly, through the fog of whiskey and wounded pride, Frank started to realize something. He had been an ass. A complete, total, inappropriate ass. Marilyn had been right to slap him. Hell, she probably should have hit him harder. Around noon, Frank got dressed and went downstairs. He found out which room Marilyn was staying in and went to her door, knocked, waited. Marilyn opened the door. When she saw Frank, her expression didn't change. Cool, professional, but not friendly. "Can I help you?" Marilyn asked. "Can I come in?" Frank asked. "Just for a minute." Marilyn considered. Then she stepped back and let him in. But she didn't sit down and she didn't offer Frank a seat. This wasn't going to be a long conversation. "I came to apologize," Frank said. "What I said last night was out of line. Way out of line. You were right to hit me. I deserved it." Marilyn waited, not making this easy for him. "I've got a reputation," Frank continued, "with women. And most of the time, that reputation is accurate. I treat women like they're there for my entertainment, like they should be grateful for my attention. And that's wrong. I know it's wrong, but I keep doing it anyway because, I don't know, because I'm Frank Sinatra and I can get away with it. Until you can't," Marilyn said. "Until I can't," Frank agreed. "You're not just another blonde, Marilyn. You're talented and smart and you've worked hard for everything you have. I shouldn't have said those things. And I definitely shouldn't have propositioned you like you were some, I don't know. Like you were nobody." Marilyn studied Frank's face. He looked genuinely sorry. His eyes were clearer than they had been last night. His voice was sincere. "Apology accepted," Marilyn said. "But Frank, you need to understand something. I'm not the first woman you've treated like that. And unless you actually change, I won't be the last. You have daughters. Would you want someone talking to them the way you talk to me?" Frank's face went pale. He had 3 kids. 2 daughters, Nancy and Tina. The thought of some man propositioning them, insulting them, treating them like objects, it made him physically ill. "No," Frank said quietly. "I wouldn't." "Then maybe think about that," Marilyn said. "The next time you're about to treat a woman like she's lucky to have your attention." Frank nodded. "You're right. You're absolutely right. I know I am," Marilyn said. Frank almost smiled. "You're tough, Monroe. Tougher than people give you credit for." "I have to be," Marilyn said. "The world isn't kind to women who look like me. The world isn't kind to anyone," Frank said. "But yeah, you're right. It's especially hard for women." He paused. "For what it's worth, I respect you. I didn't before, but I do now." "Good," Marilyn said. "Now get out. I have things to do." Frank laughed. A real laugh this time. Yes, ma'am. Years later, in 1971, Frank Sinatra was doing a television interview. The interviewer asked him about working with various stars over the years. Eventually, they got to Marilyn Monroe. You performed with Marilyn in Las Vegas, didn't you? The interviewer asked. In the 50s? Yeah, Frank said. The Sands, 1954. What was she like? Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, she was one of the toughest people I ever met. People think Marilyn was all softness and sweetness, but she had steel in her. She didn't take crap from anyone. Even from you? The interviewer asked, joking. Especially from me, Frank said. And then, to the interviewer's surprise, Frank told the story about propositioning Marilyn, about insulting her, about getting slapped in front of Dean Martin. She hit you? The interviewer asked, shocked. Marilyn Monroe actually hit Frank Sinatra? Right across the face, Frank said, touching his cheek like he could still feel it. Hard enough that I saw stars. What did you do? I apologized, Frank said, because I deserved it. I was being a pig, and Marilyn put me in my place. Best thing that could have happened to me. Did that change how you treated women? The interviewer asked. Frank paused. It made me think about it, made me realize that just because you can get away with something doesn't mean you should. Did it fix everything? No. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I became some kind of feminist icon, but that moment with Marilyn, that slap, it stayed with me. It reminded me that women are people, not objects, not conquests. People. The interview became famous, not because Frank talked about his music or his movies, but because he admitted that Marilyn Monroe had slapped him and that he had deserved it. In 1971, that was a shocking thing for a man like Frank Sinatra to admit. The story of that slap became part of Hollywood legend. Different people told different versions. Some said Marilyn had thrown Frank out of her dressing room. Others said she'd kicked him in the shins. A few claimed she'd thrown a drink in his face. But the truth was simpler and more powerful. Marilyn Monroe had stood up to one of the most powerful men in show business. She had defended herself. She had refused to be treated like an object. And she had done it in 1954, when women were supposed to smile and put up with whatever men said to them. Frank Sinatra died in 1998. In his final years, when interviewers would ask him about regrets, he often mentioned Marilyn. Not the slap, but the fact that he hadn't treated her with respect from the beginning. She was special, Frank said in one of his last interviews. Really special. And I was too stupid and arrogant to see it at first. I'm glad she hit me. I'm glad she stood up for herself. The world needs more women like Marilyn Monroe. Women who don't take garbage from anyone. Women who know their worth. The story matters because it shows us a side of Marilyn that often gets forgotten. We remember her as the blonde bombshell, the sex symbol, the tragic figure who died young. But we forget that she was strong, that she stood up for herself, that she refused to let powerful men treat her as less than she was. In 1954, slapping Frank Sinatra took courage. He could have destroyed her career, could have spread rumors about her, could have made sure she never worked in Vegas again. But Marilyn did it anyway because some things matter more than career safety. Self-respect matters more. Dignity matters more. And Frank, to his credit, respected her for it. That slap taught him something about women, about power, and about himself. It didn't make him perfect, but it made him think. Sometimes the most important moments in history aren't the ones in front of cameras. They're the ones backstage, in dressing rooms, between two people who will remember that moment for the rest of their lives. The night Marilyn Monroe slapped Frank Sinatra was one of those moments. If this story showed you a side of Marilyn and Frank you never knew, subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories. Hit that like button if you believe in standing up for yourself even when it's scary. And tell us in the comments, did you know about this confrontation? Would you have had the courage to slap Frank Sinatra in 1954? Sometimes courage isn't about facing down an army. It's about facing down one powerful man and saying, no, you don't get to treat me like that. Marilyn Monroe had that courage, and Frank Sinatra eventually learned to respect it.